be able to see from this club. I'm not defensive about it.
Yes, people, what's happening? Welcome back to the channel and welcome to another video. First things first, guys, make sure you smash the like, subscribe if you're new around here, all of that good stuff. And in today's video, I'm delighted to be joined by a friend of mine and football reporter for the Evening Standard, Dom Smith. Mate, thank you for coming. It's always a pleasure to catch up. We're going to be talking about the media perception of Chelsea, how the club are covered, is it fair, what the feeling amongst the media is. So, firstly, mate, how are you doing? It's been a while.
It has, but I'm pleased to be here. Thanks for having me on, mate.
Nah, no problem at all. I mean, obviously, Chelsea fans feel that the way that things are reported in the media on the club is perhaps slightly unfair. Certainly this summer, it's felt like it's been open season on the club. Some of it very much justified. Other bits, I feel, unfair, particularly when you see a lot of clubs now doing some of the things that Chelsea were doing that they were getting, kind of unfairly scrutinised for, particularly maybe long-term contracts. A lot of 6-7 year deals now being signed by a lot of players at a lot of clubs. You're obviously around the media side of things a lot more than I am. To start with, what's the general feeling amongst the media about Chelsea and what's going on at the club right now?
Well, I think some of it is mirrored by a lot of Chelsea fans. A lot of Chelsea fans have been more critical of the club in the last probably 4, 5, 6, 7 years than the previous era before that. Because let's be honest, Chelsea have been less stable in the last few years than in the previous period before that. And so I think it's been easier to be critical of them in that time. But also, I feel like, in terms of the contracts, you mentioned the contracts thing. As you say, that has been Chelsea leading that. But in the last few seasons, we've started to see other teams doing that as well. We know that Athletic Bilbao, rather, have had to do that policy, of course, because they work differently, don't they? They only have players from locally. So they have to protect their assets and have sort of 3, 7, 8, 9 year contracts. But Villa are a good example of a club who now have players on really long contracts, almost comparable to Chelsea and West Ham particularly as well. So I don't think they're the only ones. I think some of the, I don't think there's certainly not disdain for Chelsea in the media. I promise you that there isn't that. But I do think that there is maybe a prevailing feeling among journalists that it's quite difficult to keep up with everything that's happening at Chelsea, and you feel that you've got a grasp on what's happening, and then suddenly things completely change. We know right now with the Bowley versus Eghbali sort of arguments that are happening, and the angst at the club, I suppose. I think that has led that doesn't feel surprising to anyone who's covered Chelsea and anyone who's looked over what's been happening at Chelsea, because it's never looked in the last few years as though there's a solid business plan in place or a solid football-based plan. It's looked at times quite slapdash and quite panicky, and yet we're talking about vast amounts of money and very, very coveted footballers. Assets that you wouldn't normally, you wouldn't want to be unplanned when you're dealing with. You don't want to be spending £88 million unless you absolutely, this is Mudryk, by the way, I'm talking about here. And I know he was exciting at the time and he'd had a good season at Shakhtar Donetsk, he'd been ripping it up, but you really don't want to be committing those amounts of money unless you absolutely know that you're going to get bang for your buck. And, countless decisions from Chelsea, both in the boardroom and really in terms of being, picking players and picking managers in the last few years, they haven't proved, they haven't paid dividends, have they? And so I think there's the feeling in the media probably is that Chelsea at the moment is basically just a mismanaged club. No more than that. I don't think there's a dislike for Chelsea. I think that it's just seen as being a mismanaged club.
No, I think that's pretty fair. I mean, I'd say a lot of the things that are covered are often things that are echoed by the fans, that the fans have been going on about for a long time. I think, despite the mistakes that have been made, certainly the amount of managers that have come in, the promising of stability when it's been anything but stable for the last 2 and a bit years, on the 4th permanent manager now since these guys took over. Vast amounts of money have been spent. Some haven't worked. Some have worked. There's been some good stuff done. And there's been some not so good stuff done. The way certain players have been treated hasn't really been preferable. And I think these guys are probably still learning. And I don't think it helps that these are people that have come in that have got no background in football whatsoever. I know Bowley's got a background in sports in terms of Dodgers, Lakers and whatnot. But those sports are very different to running a Premier League football club. And I think they're finding that a lot of teething issues. I think Ed Barley particularly doesn't really trust. And that's the impression I get. Doesn't trust the people that he's employed to do the job. He feels like he has to kind of micromanage everything and oversee everything. And ultimately, I think because the takeover got rushed through, you see with the Newcastle takeover how long a takeover actually takes. This was rushed through, and a lot of these guys, whilst they've done business deals together, they never really worked together properly. And that's a big gamble to take, putting a load of rich people together for a big takeover and kind of hoping it's going to work. So I agree with what you've said in terms of the Bowley situation with Ed Barley is no surprise. That relationship before that news broke has felt like, certainly amongst Chelsea fans, that relationship has been soured for quite a while now. They definitely have. They agree on some things, and there's other things that they don't agree on. But in terms of just lastly on this media side of things, before we move on to the pitch, like what do you think the coverage of Chelsea is fair? I know obviously you mentioned there's not really a disdain for the football club, but do you feel in general the coverage is fair? Because I feel like at times I agree with it, and at times there's some very good coverage of the club, but at other times you'll see things and you just think that's really unfairly, reported, or it's a big misrepresentation of actually what's happening. Do you think that the coverage of Chelsea is fair on the whole? I know all clubs are going to feel like maybe the coverage is not fair on certain aspects, but do you think Chelsea in general can feel and fans feel that it's a fair reflection? And can you understand why fans feel that maybe the media don't cover the club in a fair way?
Yeah, I can understand it, and I don't think that the coverage of Chelsea is always fair. And I think one of the reasons for that is the easiest way to look at it is you've got to think about what different parties want. I think journalists, I'm speaking for myself, all journalists, at the bottom of the line, they want to give you information you didn't previously know. They want to find things out and tell you them, and you didn't previously know them until they did. Chelsea don't want everything that they do, or they want less that they do behind the scenes to be transparent and open and accountable and approachable to the fan base than some clubs, not than most necessarily, but than some clubs, because I think they are ultimately, it comes back to my first answer, they are ultimately doing it for the first time. That a lot of them are not from a football background. Clearly the club has wasted a lot of money on players in the last few years. They've also bought players who are showing promise. You wouldn't look at the likes of Moises Caicedo or Nicholas Jackson and say that they are signings that have paid off yet, but they're not signings where there's been wasted money yet. You still look at Caicedo and Jackson, players like that, and you think these are players who can come good. On their day they have a good game, they can come good. So, but there are a lot of decisions that the club have made that has seen wasted money, that have seen good players leave and bad players join, and money wasted. And so I think sometimes the coverage of Chelsea is just a reflection on the lack of access that journalists get to Chelsea. Also, the number of players in Chelsea's squad in the last few seasons has been so much more than other teams. Look at the number of players Chelsea have had on their books in the last few years. It can be so hard to keep up with them, and not really very many of them have been consistent performers. I think when you look at the Chelsea fan base, quite a lot of them, I think, would say about someone like Conor Gallagher, is he going to go on and become one of England's best ever midfielders? It's clearly the answer to that is no. But he was one of the best players in Chelsea's lineup last season. He was one of the most convincing performers, consistent, and this is a club that hasn't been very consistent in the last few years. And of course, he was moved on because it helped FFP, and he was happy to go, but he wasn't delighted to go. He didn't want to leave, did he? So I think when you look at things like that, it's quite difficult to see the players who are performing consistently week in, week out. There aren't very many of them. And so inevitably journalists are going to say, well, this player had a bad game again. This player, he's just scored, a few goals, but it's difficult to see how he's going to do it week in, week out. Is the coverage of Chelsea fair? For the most part, I think it is. And when it's not, I think it's a reflection of journalists wanting to get a better picture of what's really going on in the club, and looking at players and looking at a manager and a club where there's just so much upheaval and change, it's probably quite difficult to be positive about a club when they're really struggling to get back to their heyday. Not to equate them exactly to Man United, but look at Manchester United. I could imagine Manchester United fans asking the same question: do we feel like we're covered by journalists fairly? The difficult thing is they're journalists who used to cover Sir Alex Ferguson's teams getting to Champions League semi-finals and finals, and now they're covering a team that finished 8th last season. So I think sometimes the coverage of Chelsea is unfair, but it goes without saying that the club has fallen on hard times. I'm just going to quickly turn my camera off, actually, because I need to plug in my laptop. But
yeah, no worries, mate.
There's my answer.
But yeah, no, I agree. And I think the easiest way to sort of change that perception is by winning on the pitch. If you're winning on a consistent basis, then it's very hard to cover a football club that is consistently winning in what you might perceive to be a negative manner. So I think if Chelsea are feeling like that, or the fans are feeling that way, then there's one way of changing it, and that's by winning, because that soon sort of silences the doubters. But moving away from the media side of things, what are your thoughts on what's happening on the pitch right now? We can call it a bit slapdash. We can sort of say it's throwing a load of shit at the wall and hoping some of it sticks, which some has and other parts inevitably haven't. But you can't argue that there is immense talent at Enzo Maresca's dispense. I mean, only last weekend against Bournemouth, I'm there, I'm looking at it, I'm thinking, I'm not, a little bit confused by the plan sometimes, but a team that's able to bring on Jadon Sancho, Joao Felix, and Christopher Nkunku off the bench in the second half, that's not bad. That's not a bad situation to be in. I mean, what are your thoughts on the squad right now, Enzo Maresca, and what Chelsea should be expecting to do this season?
First of all, I think it's a really good squad, and I think it's the best Chelsea squad that we've seen for 5 years, I'd say, something like that. You said there that you sometimes look at Enzo Maresca and feel that you don't quite understand the plan. I would suspect that's because he also doesn't completely understand it yet, and that might scare you, given that he's the manager.
And expect him to.
Well, exactly. I mean, look at this squad. It's not a squad where you have a clear... Let's look at the wing positions, for example. You don't have a clear best winger, clear second best, clear third, fourth, fifth, sixth, seventh. You have a lot of players of a quite similar level in quite a lot of positions, and it's quite difficult for him to know who he can trust and not trust. Because if you play the same, if you trust, let's say, Pedro Neto for 10 games, and you say, I'm going to play Pedro Neto for 10 games and not drop him regardless. If by the 8th game he's got 1 assist and 1 goal, pressure is coming from those players who are not getting game time to come on. But if you do the opposite and you're so reactive to form that if a player has a bad game, he's out of the team, then you have exactly the situation Chelsea have had in the last few years, which is a complete changing of the lineup, no consistency of squad, and no ability to gather any sort of momentum. So unfortunately, both options are a bit difficult unless you hit the ground running. I do feel that this squad has, I mean, it spent a lot of money, but I think it's bought well. I think Sancho is, I would say, other than wages, which are inevitably high, but they're high for everyone at that club. Let's be honest, I think the Sancho deal is a bit risk-free. I think that's a great get, actually. I think if it happened, if we were in this summer now, I don't think Chelsea would have signed Nkunku. I think it shows that that's from a previous sort of era of the club. We've had so many eras in such a small amount of time. I'm talking about 6 months, 18 months back. But Nkunku now, is he a striker? Is he a winger? I think it's a bit difficult to know his best position. And I think now Chelsea is sort of, you can see with Sancho, with Neto, they've really gone out and got clear, wide players. And I think Nkunku's maybe caught a bit between that. But we saw with his goal at Bournemouth, he's an excellent player and he's going to have a really important season, whichever position he's played in. I think it's a good group. I think they'll have a good season. I think they'll push for top 4. And ultimately, I don't think they'll get there. This is a bit of a hot take. I think probably United might actually grab top 4. I don't see Villa doing it. I don't think Newcastle will be there this season. I think actually the 4th spot will be lower quality than in previous seasons. Actually, I don't think Tottenham will do it either, really. I think the 4th spot will be lower quality. In the last few seasons, you've seen how many teams qualify for Europe in England, and it's sort of 7 or 8. And you look at whoever's finished 4th and 5th, and you think, blimey, in a previous season, they might have finished 3rd. I think it'd be a bit different this season. I think Liverpool, City, assuming no charges. Liverpool, City, and Arsenal will be the top three. Probably City winning the league, and then I think the fourth spot could be a fair way down, to be honest. And I think Chelsea will be close. I think United might pip them, but I think Chelsea will have their best season of recent years, and I think the signs of that have been there for all to see in the beginning of the season. I do worry about the defence a little bit. They concede too many goals. Still, I also feel they concede way too many chances, and that's of course easier to miss than goals, because goals show up at the end of the night on the Premier League table, but shots don't. But you look at Robert Sanchez's performance at the Vitality. He had to bail them out, didn't he, quite a few times? So yeah, I fear for that. But I think signs of heading in the right direction.
No, I agree. I think there's a lot of quality there. As you say though, that's good, can be good, but can also be a bit problematic. Yes, we've got out and out wide players, but then there's also a lot of those players that like to drift inside, play in that sort of half space, play as a number 10, like Cole Palmer, Joao Felix, and Nkunku. These guys, Madueke, right-hand side, I think he's got that locked down right now, but I don't think a lot of people would have said that at the start of the season, given the players that have obviously been signed at the football club. But even
if he has got it locked down, and I agree with you, and I agree that it also wasn't foreseen that he'd have lockdown. But he again is one that you say about players who want to come into the middle. Madueke is again a player. We saw it on his England debut. Someone who wants to come in and get to the middle of the pitch, and that's Cole Palmer's position. So yeah, you're right. There is the risk a little bit with Chelsea kind of cramping their style in the middle of the pitch a bit.
There's a lot of players that all sort of play in a similar position, and look, it's great to have options. Of course, it is, but it makes it pretty difficult because right now you look at it and you think, right, Cole Palmer's definitely starting. Madueke is definitely starting right now. And so's Nicholas Jackson, really is the only recognised striker. So you've got Mudryk, Neto, Nkunku, Felix, Palmer and Sancho and whatever. You've got 5 or 6 players that in essence are going for one spot in that attacking quartet of the pitch. That's very hard to keep players happy, and so it is going to be a difficult job for Maresca. Just to round out, mate, what were your thoughts on Maresca? Obviously, he's a sort of a disciple of Pep Guardiola as such. Did a good job at Leicester. You could argue he did the bare minimum. Kind of won the championship with a Premier League squad. He's got a bit about him. Seems like he could be a decent manager. Kind of follows the trend of big clubs going for sort of relatively unproven managers, maybe going for looking at a philosophy rather than a CV. I've been really reasonably impressed with how he's come in, with how he speaks to the media, of how he's honest and forthcoming with his words. What are your thoughts on him? And do you think he can be a success at Chelsea? I mean, we don't know how long he's going to be here for. He could be gone at the end of the season, or he could be here for 5 years. But do you think he's got the credentials and what it takes to be a success?
I think that's a pretty fair précis of what he's like, to be honest. I think you're right. He's not proven enough, really. And actually, does he deserve a job as big as Chelsea? The fact of the matter is, no, he doesn't deserve it, no. But he's got it. And it does follow a pattern, as you say, of big clubs looking more for style and philosophy and managers who've shown promise than managers who've necessarily won major honours at the top level. What he showed at Leicester was an ability to win every week and cultivate a good style of football that the club didn't have before. And that's a good thing. And I think that's probably what Chelsea want him to do here. I think there's signs of it. I think he speaks quite well in press conferences. He's quite bullish. He was quite bullish on the treatment of Sterling, wasn't he? And Chilwell. Hard to know, I suppose, whether that's him being told to speak like that by upstairs.
I suspect it's that.
I agree. But we don't know. I mean, it may well be that he doesn't feel that they're good enough players. I doubt that, but I don't know. But he's reintroduced Chilwell back in the squad now. I guess that's a business decision, isn't it? Not really a football decision because he didn't leave. But yeah, I think the signs are good, and I just almost don't really care who a manager is this early on in any club. I just want to see them given a little bit of time. I think the sort of the brutal hiring and firing nature of football doesn't really ever allow projects to get up and off the ground. And listen, there are some managers who just will do a better job at a club, even if they're given 4 years than someone else. If you give a club Pep Guardiola and you give the same club David Moyes, Pep Guardiola is going to achieve more in however long they get. But beyond Pep, and he's an exceptional manager in a different category from everyone else, isn't he? A lot of other managers, I think ultimately it just comes down to time. Can Chelsea give Enzo Maresca the time to build what he wants to build, to try to build what he wants to build, and to see how it comes off? I hope that they do, because he did show enough promise at Leicester to suggest that he can be a success, and he's managing players who can definitely be a success.
Yeah, no, I agree, mate. I mean, that's always the big thing with Chelsea. Like, is the manager going to be given the time? You know, I thought that was going to change under this ownership, the whole preaching of long-term project stability and whatnot.
I hoped it was going to change under Tuchel. I don't mind admitting, when Thomas Tuchel was hired as Chelsea manager, I remember having just seen a few clips of him when he was PSG manager. I thought he was a very, very arrogant man. Yeah. I thought he was, the way he held
a little bit of that about you, though.
But sure, but in a way that at the time I didn't really like. I thought the way he carried himself was very arrogant. And then I saw him at Chelsea and I realised actually he's someone who gives time to journalists. He's someone who gives time to his players. He puts an arm around them. He was clearly a good tactician. And I thought that the fact that Tuchel wasn't given, I know that the fallouts happened, but it would have been nice to see him stay on. And he is a blustery figure, but it would have been good to see him stay on as manager because he's a good manager. Now that Maresca's in, I guess he can only hope that he's given different treatment and is around for longer.
I mean, he has to be given a time at the end of the day. Like, I'm firmly of the opinion that even if we finished in the bottom half, which I don't think we will, he has to be here. You know, you're preaching a project. This is the third year now, and it's not even got off the ground. We haven't really moved anywhere in 2 and a bit years under this ownership. So, regardless of what happens, he has to be given 2 or 3. He has to be given at least 2-3 seasons to try and make this work. Now, I'm not saying just blindly stick by someone if it blatantly isn't working or showing any signs of working, but we've got to move out of this cycle of constantly...
But that isn't where Chelsea are. I agree, but that isn't where Chelsea are. Chelsea are not showing blatantly no signs of improvement.
Oh, no, I agree. I agree on that. But at the same time, you know, even if we weren't showing massive signs of improvement, but there was... I think for fans, like, you can... No one likes losing, but you can accept losing if you can see that there's like signs of progress.
Yeah.
That for me, like, I don't like losing, hate losing or whatever. But if I can see signs of progress that the team is actually stepping forward and making improvements, then you can accept it a little bit more because there's something to cling on to. When you're losing and there's nothing to cling on to, that's kind of when it's the end of the road. So I hope he's going to do well. He wasn't my first choice. Wasn't even in my thoughts when Pop left. But that's kind of how the times are right now. I mean, no disrespect to these managers, but Kieran McKenna, you know, Thomas Frank and Enzo Maresca on a short list, I would have thought you're going for like a Brighton job or something, not a Chelsea job. So it's different times, but I believe in him. I think he can do something, but ultimately the fans have got to be patient with him and serve the football club. And those are two things that we don't really know if they're going to happen or not. But yeah, seems like a good point to round out, mate. Thank you so much for coming on. Really appreciate it. If people want to check out what you do and stuff, let them know where to go.
Yeah, I mean, I write for the Standard, the Evening Standard, so you can find that on standard.co.uk, and I'm on Twitter myself at Mr. Dom Smith, so that's where to go.
Perfect, guys. I'll link that in the description. Make sure you go and check it out. Some great stuff over there. Thanks for tuning in as always. Make sure you smash the like, subscribe, all of that good stuff, and I'll catch you again in another video soon.